The White House has authorized the deployment of a Marine expeditionary unit to the Middle East. This is not a training exercise. This is not a preparatory maneuver designed to signal resolve without operational follow-through. The Wall Street Journal confirmed it through a Pentagon official. 2,500 combat infantry with organic artillery, armored support, air assets and full logistical self-sufficiency are departing for the region. And the unit type, the originating base, and the destination theater together communicate something that the official framing is carefully not stating directly. The base from which these forces are deploying is located in the California desert and specializes in a very specific training profile: extreme temperature combat, arid terrain operations, the tactical and logistical challenges of warfare in desert environments. That is not incidental. That base exists to prepare forces for exactly the operational conditions they would encounter in Iran or across the Gulf region. A Marine expeditionary unit is the force structure the American military deploys when it needs to arrive first into a hostile environment, secure an entry point under fire, and hold it while larger follow-on forces are positioned behind them. They are the door. Everything that comes after walks through it. This is how large military interventions begin, not with a formal declaration of war, not with a congressional authorization, but with a forward deployment of a self-sufficient expeditionary force whose institutional function is to prepare conditions for everything that follows, and whose presence in theater creates the operational momentum and the political inertia that makes subsequent escalation progressively easier to execute and progressively harder to reverse. Subscribe to From Report right now and turn on notifications. What is being announced here, and what is being signaled by the specific way it was announced through a controlled Pentagon leak to the Wall Street Journal at this specific moment in the conflict, deserves the full analytical examination that follows. Before addressing the operational questions, the manner in which this deployment became public requires examination because it tells you more about the administration's actual strategic position than the deployment order itself. This was not an unauthorized leak. It was not obtained through investigative journalism or source cultivation that produced a genuinely unauthorized disclosure. A Pentagon official provided this information to the Wall Street Journal deliberately. In Washington's information architecture, that is a controlled release, a deliberate institutional disclosure designed to produce specific reactions in specific audiences simultaneously. The domestic American audience receives the message that the administration is escalating with purpose rather than searching for an exit, that the trajectory of this conflict is forward. The Allied governments watching from Europe, the Gulf and Asia receive pressure to clarify their own positions. And Iran receives what functions as a direct coercive signal: this is what is coming. The announcement is designed to alter Iranian calculations by making the cost of continued operations visible before those operations are required to demonstrate it. Whether that coercive signal produces the behavioral change it is designed to produce, or whether it instead accelerates Iranian preparations for the specific kind of ground force engagement that Iranian military doctrine has been built around for decades, it is the central operational question that the deployment announcement raises without answering. To understand what deploying 2,500 Marines into this specific theater at this specific moment actually means operationally, it is necessary to first establish the conditions those Marines would be entering, because those conditions are the most important variable in assessing whether this represents a credible escalatory threat or a strategic miscalculation with potentially catastrophic consequences. The United States does not currently control the airspace over the Gulf theater. This is not an analytical judgment. It is documented by the operational record of the past 21 days. 4 combat aircraft were lost in Kuwait. A KC-135 refueling tanker was destroyed over Iraq. Multiple early warning radar installations, confirmed by New York Times satellite imagery, have been eliminated across the Gulf region. 17 American military-related facilities were damaged, with 11 confirmed American military installations struck in Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain. 2 carrier strike groups repositioned away from their forward operational positions. The regional-based network that the American air campaign was designed to operate from has been systematically degraded. Ground forces require air cover. Air cover requires secure airspace. Marine expeditionary units are designed to operate under conditions of air superiority, the operational state in which friendly aviation controls the airspace above the landing force, provides close air support, and maintains the logistical bridge that sustains a force in the field. Remove air superiority, and the operational architecture that American ground force doctrine is built around collapses. You have infantry operating in contested terrain without the protective framework that makes their mission executable at acceptable cost. The question every serious defense analyst is now asking is not whether these Marines can fight. They are among the most capable ground forces in the world. The question is what they can accomplish in a theater where air superiority has not been established, where the naval routes that would support their logistics have been mined and are under active missile threat, where the regional-based network that would provide forward support has been repeatedly struck and partially destroyed, and where the adversary has publicly stated through its official military channels that it welcomes the deployment and is fully prepared to receive it on the ground. Iran's military response to the deployment announcement was immediate and calibrated. The ground forces are welcome. That is not bluster delivered for domestic consumption. It is a statement from a military that has spent 21 days demonstrating operational capabilities that pre-war assessments failed to model accurately, and that has designed its defensive doctrine specifically around the challenge of defeating exactly the kind of expeditionary landing that American Marine units are trained to execute. Iranian defensive architecture in the Gulf and on Iranian territory has been built over decades around the assumption that American air dominance would eventually produce ground force employment. The layered response, the mines in the waterways, the missile systems concealed in mountain terrain, the drone swarms that saturate defensive systems, the anti-tank capability that has prevented Israeli soldiers from patrolling their own border areas, the proxy network across Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen, was designed as a ground force defeat mechanism, not simply a deterrence posture. Iran has been preparing for this scenario for longer than this conflict has been active. The Strait of Hormuz adds another dimension to the operational calculation that the deployment announcement does not address. The strait has a navigable deep-water channel narrow enough that a single sunken supertanker could physically block it. Mine-clearing operations, not naval escort, not diplomatic statements, not marine deployments, are the operational prerequisite for any realistic resumption of commercial transit that would support the logistics of a ground force operation in the region. No confirmed mine-clearing operation at the required scale has been publicly announced. The Marines being deployed would be operating in a theater where the maritime logistics chain the ground forces depend on is exposed to exactly the mine threat that has closed the strait commercial shipping for more than 20 days. The diplomatic dimension of the American strategic position has developed simultaneously with the deployment announcement, and the two pictures together are telling the same story from different angles. Trump called publicly on China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to send naval vessels to the Strait of Hormuz to help secure the waterway. The public framing was a coalition appeal. The analytical reading is different. When a government that launched a unilateral military operation without consulting its regional allies publicly appeals to China to send warships to a waterway whose closure it is responsible for creating, that is not coalition leadership. It is the behavior of an administration that has exhausted its available unilateral options and is attempting to recruit participation from governments it did not consult before the conflict began. China's response was precisely what experienced analysts of Beijing's diplomatic communication expected. A spokesperson called for an immediate ceasefire and declined to specify whether China would send naval vessels. China described its role as constructive facilitation of de-escalation and peace restoration. In the language of professional diplomacy, that response is a no. China is not going to deploy naval assets to address an operational problem that a unilateral American decision created. Beijing is positioning itself as the neutral adult in the room, the party calling for ceasefire and declining to be conscripted into a coalition whose objectives it opposed from the outset. France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom have not responded affirmatively. The Gulf Arab states have publicly declined offensive operations. The coalition that was apparently assumed to materialize in support of this conflict when it was planned has not materialized. The multilateral legitimacy that would transform a unilateral American operation into a defensible collective action has not been generated. The condition that Iran has attached to its Hormuz position clarifies the strategic sophistication of the instrument it is deploying. Iran has stated officially that the strait is open for vessels from countries not actively supporting the American military operation. Chinese tankers transit, Indian tankers transit, non-aligned country vessels transit. The closure applies specifically to American-aligned shipping. This is not a blunt universal blockade that generates opposition from everyone, including Iran's own supporters. It is a precision economic instrument targeting the Western coalition, while preserving the energy access of the countries whose diplomatic support Iran depends on maintaining. It turns the strait into a targeted sanction rather than a general one. And every day that instrument holds, the economic pressure on the specific countries it targets accumulates. The Pentagon's statement that the route remains open as long as there are no attacks describes a different reality than the insurance market is pricing. Lloyd's of London and the global war risk insurance underwriting community have determined that the actuarial cost of covering Gulf transit is prohibitive for normal cargo economics. When insurance is withdrawn, commercial vessels do not move, regardless of what the Pentagon says about route availability. The maritime traffic that carries 20% of globally traded oil is not responding to official statements. It is responding to the actuarial mathematics of war risk insurance applied to a mined waterway where the political authority governing the closure has stated it is permanent policy. The historical comparison that analysts and historians are drawing to this deployment is one that deserves direct engagement rather than dismissal, because the pattern it documents is not speculative. It is the record of how the United States has entered its most costly military commitments. On March 8, 1965, approximately 3,500 Marines landed at Da Nang in Vietnam. The official characterization at the time was that they were deploying to protect installations. No one in the official briefings was describing it as the opening movement of a conflict that would eventually deploy more than 500,000 American military personnel. That landing was the entry point for an escalatory sequence that returned those personnel in numbers the American public had not been prepared to absorb, and in the specific form of flag-draped caskets arriving at military airports in the quiet way that does not make the evening news. The comparison is not a prediction that the Iranian theater will follow the specific trajectory of Vietnam. The geographies differ, the adversaries differ, the historical contexts differ. The comparison is a pattern, the pattern by which limited expeditionary deployments described as protective and contained in their initial framing have historically functioned as the entry point for escalatory sequences whose ultimate scale bore no resemblance to the initial description. The operational conditions today are worse than those that existed at Da Nang in 1965. The Marines who landed at Da Nang had American air superiority above them. The routes that would supply and reinforce them were not mined. The adversary they were being deployed against did not have the satellite targeting intelligence and drone saturation capability that American forces have been encountering for 21 days in the Gulf theater. The Marines being deployed today are being sent into a theater where every one of those conditions is reversed, and the adversary has publicly stated that it has been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. There is a dimension of this deployment announcement that the official framing is not designed to communicate, but that the circumstances surrounding it make analytically unavoidable. A country that is confident in its military position, that is executing a conflict according to plan, that has achieved the operational dominance it expected to achieve, does not call publicly on China to send warships to a waterway. It does not deploy a Marine expeditionary unit from a desert warfare training base into a theater where it has not established air superiority. It does not announce a potential ground force deployment through a controlled Pentagon leak to a newspaper. These are the behaviors of an administration that has exhausted the options it initially planned to use and is now creating forward momentum, because the alternative, acknowledging that the conflict has not developed according to plan, carries political costs that the administration is not prepared to absorb. 21 days ago, Iran was described in official briefings as a country whose military capacity would be decisively degraded within 48 hours. Today, 54 waves of offensive operations have been conducted. The world's largest LNG complex was struck. A Tel Aviv neighborhood was seeded with cluster munitions. Ben Gurion International Airport was destroyed. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed to Western shipping for more than 3 weeks. 2 carrier groups have repositioned. Multiple aircraft have been lost. Iran's intelligence chief was assassinated, and Iran's supreme leader issued a revenge vow that every drop of blood has a price. The American military is withdrawing from forward positions across Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and the UAE under a vocabulary of strategic repositioning. And now a Marine Expeditionary Unit is departing from a desert warfare training base toward a theater that its operational architecture was not designed to enter under these conditions. The country that was supposed to last 48 hours is on day 21. It has not collapsed. It has not exhausted its modern arsenal. It has demonstrated operational coordination across 7 simultaneous fronts with a proxy network that the decapitation campaign targeting its leadership has not dismantled, and it has stated through official channels that the ground forces being deployed are welcome. Subscribe to From Report and turn on notifications. When the Marine Expeditionary Unit's destination and operational parameters are confirmed, when China's response to the Hormuz appeal produces its final form, when the Iranian retaliation for the intelligence chief assassination takes operational shape, when the next wave of strikes tests the air superiority conditions that would be required for ground force protection, the analysis will be here. Evidence first, analysis second, what it means for you always. One question in the comments before you leave. Does deploying ground forces into a theater without established air superiority, with mined waterways, with damaged forward base infrastructure, against an adversary that has explicitly welcomed the confrontation, represent a strategy with a defined achievable objective, or does it represent something that the Vietnam comparison describes more accurately than the official framing does? Every response gets read. This is from